Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. I am Heidi Erdman, and I am the Director of Sales and Marketing for Care@WorkByCare.com. Before we get started, just a little housekeeping note. If you have any questions as we go along, feel free to type them in the GoToWebinar chat bar on the right-hand side, and we'll answer them as we go along if we can, or we'll have a session for questions and answers at the end. So without further ado, I am very excited to introduce our two experts for today's session. Mollie Lombardi, who is the co-founder and CEO of Aptitude Research Partners, and Al Zink, who is the head of HR from Care.com. And both Mollie and Al will be providing tips for selecting the right mix of benefits for your diverse workforce. So Mollie, I will turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you today, and I had the pleasure of actually sitting in the room with my co-presenters today, which is always more fun. So happy to be here with you all. As Heidi mentioned, I'm a co-founder of Aptitude Research Partners, and we are a research and analyst firm that looks specifically at the HCM landscape, and we really look at all the different aspects of talent acquisition, talent management, and workforce management, how they work individually and how they work together to deliver employee experience and employee engagement and business results for organizations. And I'm very happy to be here with Al, who actually has to do all the things that I write about every day. And turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mollie. My name's Al Zink. I'm the SVP of HR here at Care.com. I've worked here over the past 5 years and tried to do a lot of the things that we're talking about today as the company's grown and gone through a lot of changes. And I've spent the last 40 years in HR in a variety of companies across a variety of industries. So excited to get a chance to talk to you folks about some of the things we've learned over the time we've been in this industry.
Great. So with that expertise and the benefit of Al being here, we're going to talk about some of the realities of the workforce today, which I imagine you've seen some changes in those over the past several decades.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk about what we're calling the benefits life cycle and the 5 aspects that we called out: identify, design, communicate, integrate, and measure. And we'll talk a little bit about what those mean. In each of those sections, we're going to have some research and then some tips from Al about how to make it really come to life. And then, as Heidi mentioned, we'll have some key takeaways and Q&A, but keep the questions coming as we go through. As we said, if there's something relevant in the moment, we'll get to it. Otherwise, we'll get to it at the end. So let's talk a little bit about today. You know, it's a complex world we live in today, and certainly when it comes to information, we are inundated with data. This is data pulled from a couple of stat sites on the internet, and just thinking about the number of Google searches and tweets, and not even Instagram posts, but Instagram likes we see. There's so much information. We're constantly connected and constantly being bombarded with information. And all that information also means we are overwhelmed with choices. We almost have too many choices to really be able to make a decision. And finding some trusted sources to help us curate and sort through a lot of those that information can be really difficult.
Yeah, one of the things that's the problem is that there was a problem years ago where you didn't have enough data and information, right. And today we've got the opposite, which I think is almost worse. And then going from data to insights is tricky too. So we can have lots of data, but it doesn't really give you the insight. So sort of making that transition in the hierarchy from data to information to insights and helping people sort of translate all of this information into something that helps them make a decision gets a little more complicated.
Yeah, just throwing the data over the wall isn't enough. And speaking of translation, you know, not only do all of these ways of communication and trading information have their own language, especially when we start to talk about benefits, it has its own language as well. So being able to use all these communication channels to talk about, to have their own language, to talk about a subject that is a bit foreign to a lot of us civilians can be a real challenge for organizations.
Yeah, the language of benefits and the language that people are using day to day on the web are quite different, and it's complex and it's changing so rapidly. So helping, again, people sort of understand what's happening and also translate it is a tricky venture.
And because we're always connected, it's an ongoing conversation. And one of the things we've been saying as we've been preparing for this is, you know, enrollment is an event, but your benefits are something you live every day, and it's something you experience every day. And from an engagement and employee experience perspective, no matter how great the enrollment process was, if something goes wrong 6 months later when you try to go to the doctor or try to use some of your benefits, it can really ruin the whole impact.
I mean, I think one of the things we want to convey today, and people out there may be living it, is this is an iterative and evolving process. This is a kind of a higher order of communication. It's more than a brochure and a renewal meeting. This is not a check the box kind of thing. You've got to continually do this kind of work, again, because it's changing, it's complex, and things are changing in people's lives. So you just have to keep this as an ongoing and consistent process.
Which is a great lead into the benefits life cycle that we're going to talk about. And it starts with identifying, and you'll notice it's a continuum, so we'll start there because it's a convenient place to start, but we'll get back to it too. But identifying, who are the people in your organization? What are their needs? And it's beyond some of the simple demographics, really understanding what's meaningful to them, what's going to create a meaningful, sticky experience that's going to make them understand that their benefits are something differentiated about their relationship with you. We get into design, which is being thoughtful about the plan you put together, not only for the needs of the people you currently have, but for the talent you might need going after in the future. Then communication. I think communication is one of the steps in this process that really gets overlooked. You and I have talked a lot about that, but being able to help people understand what's available to them and how they can access it.
Yeah, and what is communication today? Because it's a higher order than it was before. I think that, the company's role in helping people understand it is to be an educator and a communicator. So it's a different kind of thing than just getting the information out there, but it's really having a dialogue and a conversation. And the employees have to be consumers. They have to think more like a consumer and less like a recipient of information.
And these benefits are no longer a yes/no decision. Do you want healthcare or do you want benefits, yes or no? It really is more complex and it requires a new kind of communication. And that also feeds into the integration, right? They need to be integrated into all the other experiences when you're hiring, when people are changing positions and jobs, when they're going on to new projects or things change in their own life. It's a constant integration with their lives and also their work lives and what's happening in their work. And then the last piece is measure, which I think along with communicate is often overlooked.
Yeah, it is.
And we'll talk about a couple kinds of measurement, not just sort of the hard dollar ROI, but really how do you measure the impact on your talent initiatives and other parts of the organization.
And I think, when we talk about a new digital age, that slide we showed earlier with people on their iPhones and iPads, it needs to be a two-way discussion. Yeah. So we have to do it in a different way when people are communicating with those kinds of tools. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It means you have to think about it differently.
And it has to be iterative to that point, right? Because things are going to change. The marketplace is going to change. Your people who work for you are going to change, and your business goals are going to change. So it's an iterative process.
You and I had talked about this, Molly. It's breaking through the noise.
Yes.
And that noise is really the heavy data. How do you break through all of this information? So today it's all the data versus years ago we didn't have enough. How do you break through it?
And really, we talked about one size sort of fits none. So how do you design a plan that's sort of one unified plan that you can offer as an organization, but that can be ultra personalized for the different groups within your organization? I know this is something that you put together here at Care at Work, but I really like the fact that it shows some of the overlap. It's not neat and tidy, even when you're looking at some of these demographic groups.
Yeah, and there's a question too about how flexible we can be. So, I'm finding the feedback I'm getting from employees is, can we provide menus and sort of a choices, a cafeteria style, which was more common many years ago. And there's a lot of restrictions that don't let you do it. So we're forced more to talk about sort of what's behind the process and have people understand why we can and can't do certain things. So there's circumstances for sure, governmental regulations, the insurance companies, all are factors in terms of what we're able to offer and what we're able to do. But, our employees are looking at themselves and their families. They're looking at the culture. Is this a great place to work? Do I understand what's behind it? And then our business and our business success allow us to do more or less. It's obviously there's a cost factor, which we'll talk about as well. And
I love what you said about helping people understand what's behind it. I always say there's nothing that we can't work through except a surprise.
Yeah, exactly.
So really making sure people understand that. And really, because what it comes down to is people really care about one experience, their own. But it doesn't mean that they really only care about themselves, because part of their own experience of your organization is the understanding of it's an organization that cares for people and that lets every individual have their unique experience.
Yeah, I think that, people can be very proud of a benefit, even if it's not one that they can take advantage of. I mean, here at our company, just given what we do, but maternity and paternity benefits are important. A lot of people can't participate. Or don't participate in those programs, but they're quite proud of the fact that we offer kind of leading edge benefits in that particular space.
And as a hiring manager, those kind of benefits, even if you don't consume them yourselves, or lots of different types of benefits, the ability to be flexible and respond to different needs of people you're looking to hire can be really helpful.
And I think one of the things, as we're talking about the cycle today, it's important to think sort of down the road. Somebody may not take advantage of that benefit today, but 5 years from now, they may have they may have a marriage, they may have children. So what they don't use today, they may look down the road and say, this is a place that's going to offer me those things later on. And it's a retention tool for a company that does that well.
And the other thing is, even if you have all these great things, if people don't know about them and don't use them, they're really never going to show full value. So we're going to talk about some strategies to make sure that we are delivering the full value.
One of the things this makes me think of, and it's sort of a funny story, but it kind of highlights a bit of a problem. When it says it's only useful if it's used. We did a survey of our employees a while ago, and we asked them if they thought one of the questions around our life insurance program, if they thought it was an effective program. And one of our employees answered, "I don't know, I haven't used it." And unfortunately, in a survey, you don't know if somebody's joking with you or if somebody truly doesn't understand what a life insurance program is. And by the way, I have found out that is the case in some situations. Well, what is it? So it told me that we didn't understand. The survey isn't a great way to just get the information you need to do other things, but also it doesn't allow us to interact. So that's an important element. Again, we'll talk more about this, but.
Yeah. So it brings us to our first tips when we think about how we're understanding and identifying the needs of the population we're serving.
Well, and just like our employees, as they evaluate this, looking at the external market, there is a ton of data out there and trends and information. So for us to go from the data to the information and then getting insights that we can sort of make a conclusion, are we at the market level? So we can share that with our employees and let them know it. Surveying, as I just mentioned, surveying the employees, it's not that it isn't valuable, but it's only one tool in the toolkit. So, we want to make sure that even though it's a digital age, we're getting information and insight from our employees as well. And I keep highlighting interaction and conversation with our employees. So the next two, communicating and identifying, one of the things we've done inside our company, which I'm finding incredibly valuable, is we look at how we can confirm that the information and the survey data that we're getting is valuable and confirmed by our employees. So we created the survey advisory group. It's about 20 employees that have a variety of backgrounds at different places in their lives, different generations, different ages, different departments. And they come together and help us look at the data that we get from the surveys. And then that's where we can get some information and insight. That group, as they understand how we're going and looking at this and making decisions about it, also become our champions. They're the ones that can go out and say, look, I was in the meeting and I can see that they're struggling with this point. Or I was in the meeting and there's a reason why we can't do this right now. Or they're thinking about things that you haven't even asked about yet. And so it gives us a way to increase in our effectiveness in communicating with our employees. And another group that we'll talk about as champions will be managers. And we'll talk a little bit about how we do that, but they're clearly a very strong group of champions inside the company as well.
And they're often in that position of not necessarily having full influence on what's offered, but not necessarily having full influence on what people take up, but they're in the middle.
Yeah.
We'll chat about that. But once we've learned a little bit about the people in our organization, we have to come to design. And of course, it's not all just about what the individual's needs, but also where the company is going. And so we're going to talk about three sort of intersecting life cycles that you need to think about when you're designing your programs. The first one is the organization's life cycle. And if you think about, a startup company, maybe you're starting this hyper growth phase. So you might be attracting a different type of talent. You get some stability. There's some disruption. You might need to change tack or change strategy, find some different, or your people just have matured and need different things. You get to a sense of realignment, and then you get to some growth, and then you might go into another hypergrowth cycle. So it's, again, this is one of the three life cycles. It's going to be evolving and influencing how you think about what benefits you're going to be offering.
Yeah, a very real piece of this for me is keeping pace with the market. But what we've learned over the years is, and again, as benefits have become more complicated, you can get into a trap of meeting the market needs and not meeting the employee needs. So, in the past, you'd go out and look at what the other companies in the area were offering. I can go look at TripAdvisor or Wayfair and look at what they're offering, exactly match what's there and feel very good about the fact we're at market. The problem is that our employees may be looking for things that aren't on those lists, and I've kind of falsely have the opinion that we're all set. So there's more work to do to really understand how not to have one but not the other. You need both, the market and the employee input.
And so really it's sort of taking that, balancing that company point of view then with where the individual is. So the life cycle, or to coin a term. People enter your organization, whether they're fresh out of college or, later in their career, but they sort of enter the organization. They may spend some time being a bit of a party of one. They're looking at building their career. They have some planned responsibilities. Maybe they decide to get married or decide to make a move or decide to have children. There's always some unplanned responsibilities that come into our lives, whatever those may be, health things or other circumstances. And then also we're always growing in our careers. And this is almost not even a life cycle. They all kind of overlap sometimes as well.
They do.
But sort of thinking about if the organizational life cycle is what the company believes about talent and who it needs, this is sort of the individual ability to access that information depending on where their needs are.
I mean, one of the things we talked about, Mollie, was, one group that gets lots written about it is the millennials. When we had our meeting with our survey group, somebody had mentioned that millennials arrive at the company in their first job in debt, wanting a career path. Sometimes they're seen in all the articles as entitled. But if you take the facts, if you go out and look at the market data, 60% of millennials have at least one long-term debt, 30% of them have two or more, and 50% of them worry about it being able to pay them back. So they arrive worried, not entitled. And I think what they look for are expectations about, if I come in here and I work hard, what rewards are there for me? How can I grow in my career? Because they've got realities that they're trying to deal with, and at the same time they want a career and success. So it's not entitlement, it's setting expectations correctly about what they can do.
And understanding those needs could overlap. I mean, planning for future wealth is something that millennials may be worried about and baby boomers may be worried about, so finding where those commonalities are. And then the last life cycle is also the employee life cycle, depending on where they are in their relationship with your company, can influence things. So we think about the sort of onboarding, learning, managing performance, developing and growing, and then moving to their next phase is really important. So we're thinking about the intersection of the company's needs, where the individual is, and then also how you want to communicate around those benefits based on where they are in the process. Obviously, onboarding is a time when there's a lot of communication, but not forgetting that as people progress through their career with the organization, there may be additional things that they need to be aware of. Again, it's not a one-day event. It's an ongoing process.
The company just needs to make sure it has the resources, systems, and experts to support this as well. These changes, the rapid changes and individual needs. So you're not going to have one person be able to do this job. It's going to have to be a mix of different resources.
Absolutely. And I think it's also, again, setting expectations, not doing all this because everything on these charts needs to be done in the same way, but because it's the right mix for your organization. So tip number 2.
Yeah, so as you think about all of this, it's great if you can find a common list of needs that support all of your employees. But from an organization standpoint, we're looking, obviously at cost. $1 billion company can't do what $100 million company can't do what $1 billion company does. So cost is a factor. You might want to do all the wonderful things for your employees, but you have to sort of look at priorities and set the expectations around it. Certainly competition in market, being able to offer what other companies out there are doing. And then the goals, are you trying to hire, retain, motivate? Maybe it's all three, but usually in different phases of growth, companies are doing different things. So organization is clearly one of the things you're thinking about in the design. Then the life cycle that you mentioned. Where are people in their lives? Are they single, married? Do they have children? There's generational factors. They have just different things going on in their lives. And the last piece, the employee piece, which is not last, but last on the list here, but new employees going through onboarding, going through the cycles as a company. They come in and they start to perform and they start to add value and their expectations change. One of the things that we've talked about internally here is that life cycle and employee life cycle are overlapping quite a bit now. So a lot of that comes from the fact that who you are and what you do are kind of the same thing these days. First thing somebody asks you at a party is, what do you do?
Right.
And so those things, when something happens in your life, it impacts your work, and what happens at work, it impacts your life. So these two almost aren't separate anymore. They're almost together. And it's something that makes it more complicated to manage.
But I think that's such a good point, because it's not about just understanding your ability to communicate around these benefits, but being able to understand the fact that it is so much. It is your work is your life. It's there are other pieces of it as well, but the line between work and life and home is so much more blurred than it's ever been before.
Well, we used to talk about work-family balance, and I think it's now about integration.
Yes.
When you're home, you're working. When you're at work, you're dealing with things from home, and and everybody knows it. It's just the way we have to do it. Right. The speed of things today.
Yeah. Blending that balance, right?
Yes, exactly.
So next we're going to talk about communication. And again, we've talked about this is one of these areas that is often neglected. And there's been a lot of focus on how technology can help enable this as well. But we looked at a number of ways in our recent research of how organizations are delivering benefits information. And unsurprising, the most common ones are things around documents on a website. You can call the call center, documentation handed to you during onboarding. So those sort of one way and time at a time and place sort of communication tools. And then lesser used, as we'll see in a little while, often more impactful things like live and in-person sessions, to your point, where you can talk about those questions and talk about making sure you're speaking.
Well, I can ask that employee about the life insurance question.
Right.
Are you kidding, or you really don't know how it works?
Exactly. And I think it's also a really good point is that education is so important. We talk about pay equity a lot, but I talk about opportunity equity as well. If you don't have the opportunity to understand the tools available to you, you aren't going to be able to get as far as you might be able to. So helping people understand that is really important. And you and I talk about this a lot in our conversations, but someone said this to me at a conference: employee communications require consistency in message and variety in format. So everyone needs the same information, but the way they hear is very, very different depending on where they are in their life and where they are in their situation.
Well, I was at a seminar by Tony Robbins, and one of his quotes was, "We're all different in how we perceive the world. Use this understanding as a guide to our communications with others."
Yes.
And when you think of the list you just had up there, it's almost, and I thought it was a great list, by the way. That's an example of how you have to think about your benefits program. It's not a brochure, and it's not a benefits fair. It's a list of ongoing activity that's consistent and has variety and is clear for people. So
your quote reminded me of another one, just because I'm a word nerd in addition to being a data geek. But I think it's Shaw says that the biggest illusion about communication, or the biggest problem with communication, is the illusion is that it has occurred. Right? I put it out there. Didn't you read it? Right?
Yep. Yep.
And really, what we find is companies that have higher levels of engagement, here in the blue on the slide, are much more likely to use some of these two-way and more innovative approaches. So we see a significant more likelihood for these engaged organizations to use live or virtual in-person meetings where people can ask those questions. Using video, sort of a more modern way. If you think back to that first slide that had this internet stats, the number of videos being consumed is unbelievable, in multiplying the amount of searches and other vehicles people are using to find information. And even interactive tools help guide people through that decision. So you can ask the person-to-person questions using technology to be able to deliver that personalized experience but in a sort of more efficient way as well.
I think it's important. This is an opportunity for companies to show, from a cultural standpoint, what's important.
Absolutely.
So when you take real time to go through this with your employees, get their feedback, and they'll recognize very quickly you're spending the time or you're not, but also the quality and the detail of what you're providing and the variety. So it sends a strong message about, this is important to us. This is important that we want you to understand it. We want to make sure you're benefiting from the benefits.
Yeah.
And it's really important for us to do that. So, a quick, we keep using this example of a benefits fair or a brochure, but that was typical of companies, and people would sort of walk away, not understand a lot of what was there. Companies, to get the value, but also to send a strong message that we care about this stuff, and we want you to benefit from.
And I think also too, we're finding, whether it's people of any generation, but we sometimes hear about millennials or people maybe who are later in their career, have families. There are other people involved in their benefits decisions often. And so being able to find ways to communicate that maybe are more accessible for those other people who might be influencing their decisions. If you're a first-time job holder and you may have questions, you want your parents to take a look, or you want your friends to take a look and say, because again, there's different channels of communication, trying to give people access to be able to make those decisions. So your tips on
back to me again.
Yeah.
So educating is something we've been talking about a lot. It's a totally different word than communicating, and it's really a higher order of getting information and confirming that people have received that information, Mollie, as you were talking about it. So, as you're thinking about the audiences that we're talking about, millennials look at the cost and the value because of, again, the circumstances that they're coming in with. Gen X employees, and again, I'm generalizing a little bit here, there's overlap with all of these, but Gen X looks at the breadth of the plan and the competitiveness of it. And then the baby boomers are worried about the coverage. Is this going to cover what I'm going through? I'm personally there. And then wellness itself, not sort of well-being, but wellness more. So there's an opportunity with educating and then sort of marketing to our employees sort of in advance what it is we're trying to help them accomplish and make sure we're in sync with them. So when you talk about something like well-being, it's not just benefits when you're sick. But a company that's really, thinking ahead is saying, we don't want you to get sick. We want you to do things proactively to avoid it. So well-being is taking on a new definition right now. Another big one is when you're talking about family. So again, when you're marketing and talking to your employees, when you help their family, you're helping them, and vice versa. So, we just got a report from our broker, and we looked at the fact that there was 8 of our employees with claims over $250,000, and it wasn't the employee, it was a family member. It reminds me when I walk around the halls here and I look at people's faces. I don't know who has that problem. It's confidential information. I just know there's 8 people out there that are going home at night and somebody is very ill in their family. So marketing and educating your employees on the benefits isn't just one of those check the box company things. This is helping their families. And then I think a big deal now too is the holistic look at how we're helping our employees. So when you look at educating and marketing, how are we talking about not just the benefits, but the policies of the company, the programs, the time off, the leaves of absences that people may need, and incorporating into this a new definition of what sort of holistic well-being is. It's not just benefits.
And it's so true. You never know what people are going through, and often the things that are causing them stress may not be of themselves, family members. And it is a good reminder. The reason we offer these benefits is not just because we're required to by law in some cases, or because it's a marketplace competitive. It's because at the end of the day, it's part of how we express what our beliefs are about talent. And if our beliefs about talent are that we want to support people in all the ways we can so they can be their best and show up and be their best, that really is a valuable lesson.
So again, it kind of highlights the importance of ongoing communication, because these events are happening in people's lives all during the year, not just at the end of the year when renewal comes up, or the beginning when you're rolling it out into people's paychecks. It's all year long.
Yep, and that sort of gets to the integration and the manager conversation we mentioned earlier, because managers often are the front line that may know those 8 people, or those people that are going through something that's a big change for them, or that's sort of a big deal in their life, and may be able to help point people towards benefits that they might not have been aware of. So we've talked a little bit about the need for benefits to be communicated during the talent acquisition process, and certainly the war for talent is still real as the economy has gotten better. It's key skills are hard to find in certain geographies. Talent in general is hard to find. And people are looking for any competitive edge. And there's a lot of attention paid to candidate experience lately, but that's leading into the employee experience, which is having that competitive compensation and benefits package, and really making sure that's well understood. And to your point, it really is we define culture at Aptitude as the set of behaviors that are rewarded or discouraged by the people, processes, and systems. You can have all the rules you want or all the policies you want, but if they're not being lived, it's really not your culture.
I would even add 2 words to your definition, which is knowingly or unknowingly.
Yes.
So you have to be pretty aware of what you're trying to send out to your employees, and consciously make decisions. If we do this, what are we saying to our employees? If we don't do this, what are we saying to our employees? So that's important. The other thing is, we talked a minute ago about knowing what's behind the benefits. So our ability to go to a much larger company, I won't name them, but assume it's a $1 billion company. By the way, we recruit people from $1 billion companies that have better benefits than we do. The only reason I would leave a company, there may be others, but a factor on the benefit side is, if I know at our company, what is the thought process behind the benefits? Is this a company that's going to grow and scale and keep improving their benefits as it grows? Or is it sort of not an employee-friendly company in the way of doing proactive growth of their benefits program? So if I leave a $1 billion company, I want to know, at least philosophically, the company I'm joining is going to get me back to where I was. And it's an interesting question. If you don't think of what's behind it in the process and you don't share it, you're not going to be able to recruit those people.
Well, and I think the difference between, we talked about cost, the difference between taking a cost-centered approach that says we're going to cut benefits and make you pay more premiums, versus we're going to focus on wellness. We're going to focus on some of these other broader issues to help bring down the costs. So I think it really is important to not only understand the what, but sort of what's behind that as well when it comes to understanding the benefits package. And managers really are the front line of this. They have to model. They have, if your manager says to do something, but they're not doing it themselves, that it's really hard to believe that they're really going to support you in that.
I think I told you a story yesterday. I worked at a pretty large company with 7,000 employees, and they started a sabbatical program. Our CEO actually got up and really put himself out on the line. He dressed up in a jungle safari outfit and told people to go out there and enjoy their sabbaticals. And 6 months later, no one had taken one because none of the executive team had taken one and none of the leaders had taken them. And so the message was, we have this benefit, but it wasn't really supported. So people were uncomfortable doing that. So this leadership supporting and demonstrating that it's something they care about is critical for it to work.
Well, and managers need support around this. They need to know they have the strategies and things backed up. And I think it's two sides, right? You don't want to promise things that you can't deliver, but you don't want to put out programs that are not meaningful or that are not going to be put into place, right?
Yeah.
Like sabbatical, I think that's such a classic example. Sounds like a great thing, but you can write it on paper, but it's not really part of the culture because no one is taking advantage of it. So your last tip around helping managers become champions.
Well, and I think it's pretty critical. I mean, managers, first of all, have to have the charter and the authority to do this. They have to know it's something that's important in their job. So what I find is a lot of times managers just don't know about the benefits. They're employees as well. And so to take the time out of all the other things they're trying to do and sit there and become experts on the benefits program, we need to show them what the value is in doing that. So the manager is champion, they need the information, and they need to know what is the charter and why. Why is it if an employee asks me a question, will it make a difference? And there's a big answer to that. It's just like clicking on the web. If you have to click 3 or 4 times, you tend to drop off. If your employee is right there, and your managers are usually the ones closest to you, and you have that first question, and your manager says, I don't know, go see HR, we know probably half of those employees won't go ask. They won't call, they won't check with the benefits broker. However, if the manager is knowledgeable enough to say, well, actually, I do know the answer to that, and just went through a training program, or I'm up to speed, that question gets answered. So I think it's pretty critical that they play a role not only in getting the information out there, but helping our employees understand the value proposition. And if a manager also in the process says, we have a really great benefit. Somebody asks about paternity leave, and the manager says, we are one of the few companies that has a great paternity program. That's better than it's coming from HR or even the CEO. This is somebody they work with and trust every day. So I think very critical, but the companies need to help the managers understand the impact of this role and give them the information and the charter to go do this.
It reminds me, my husband works for a large company and they were doing open enrollment, and it was a year when they were switching from to consumer-based healthcare plans, which looked really scary and looked really expensive. And he and another manager sort of had worked it out on their own, sort of what the actual decisions and choices meant to them. And so when people came to ask them, they're like, well, this is what I've done. Even though HR had lots of beautiful brochures and calculators online, when their boss was able to say, like, well, here's the questions I'm considering. And even then, even if they didn't know the complete answer, even getting that partial answer made them more likely to go and get the rest of the answer because they understood it was actually something their manager cared about as well.
I mean, this is true where the manager is really the front line. They have the pulse and also can play a role as champions to feedback to HR, to leadership about changes in information and new programs that we should be thinking about.
And even for something like that, there were a lot of people who thought it looked like a raw deal, but when they did the math, it was like, oh, actually, this actually does benefit me, right? So a little change agency there as well. So that brings us to the last part of our life cycle, measurement, which again, often neglected in so many things. But I think this also feeds back in the spirit of the cycle too. Think about what you're trying to impact when you design programs as well. But because there's multiple things that you can sort of gain value around. It's sort of the different value propositions you can impact for employees, for HR itself, and for business leaders. For employees, it can be about flexibility or helping them focus on productivity or on the job by taking care of needs outside of work. HR, being able to drive value for reporting and reducing administrative burden, being able to really be a partner to the business. And for business leaders, obviously there's the ROI, but there's also the business performance and sort of opportunity risk that's mitigated by having a value proposition for benefits that drives greater attendance or that drives greater productivity and things like that. So it's important to think about these multiple value propositions when you're designing and thinking about your measures as well.
I think this is another area when you're not talking about how to communicate or how to educate, but who is it you're educating and what's their charter.
And they have such different needs from the experience of working with.
I tend to think of the word charter as I look at each group. What's the charter? What's the role? And then what is it that they're going to be using to make their decisions, and how are they going to communicate, what they're communicating. And
when you optimize for one of these and you don't think about the others, it tends to go a little off the rails. You have to think about all of them. And really, there's also, we've talked a little bit about this, the multiple value drivers. There's the top line, there's, being able to grow, being able to have people who are more engaged, people who are not worried about things outside of work because they have the care they need or they have the resources they need. The bottom line, being able to be more efficient, reduce costs. Then also that risk avoidance, losing high potentials, what does that really cost you? Having a vacancy remain open because you don't have a competitive offer. Those are real, very hard to quantify, but we know have a real impact on our organization's ability to be successful.
Yeah, I saw those 3 words across the bottom of each box, and I said that's kind of what I live by when I'm looking at this. It's the productivity, the efficiency. High potential turnover is outrageously expensive. Yeah. You're counting on your bench strength to be able to help the company grow and scale. So when you've invested and that person has invested and they go elsewhere for whatever the reason, you're losing a number of different factors: institutional knowledge, ability to get things done, potential new leaders. It's a big deal.
And it can be contagious.
Yeah.
It can be contagious as well. Yeah. And I think there's some statistics around us. The top 5% are like 10 times the productivity of your bottom 80 or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, it can be really costly. And we've seen in our own research the impact of organizations that have this strong understanding of benefits, that have communicated that not only have a belief that they should provide benefits, but also really making sure people are taking advantage of them and understand the value of them, are more likely to have increased their year-over-year engagement scores. They're more likely to have reduced turnover by almost 2 to 1. And more than 2 to 1, more likely to have improved productivity. So again, we're seeing this correlation. It's not the only factor, obviously, in these measures, but it's important to look at beyond just sort of the efficiency for HR's sake, but what are the business impacts that we can correlate to say, the fact that we are communicating around these benefits is really helping us achieve these business goals.
Now, one of the things I hear a lot, and you can go out and Google this, you'll come up with 20 articles on it, but one of the main reasons people leave is their manager, but a second reason they leave, which frequently gets buried under the manager, is being out of the loop or in the dark, or I don't know what's behind it. And we talked about that again earlier. Yeah. So when employees walk out and they say, well, there was a time we used to do a much better job. I used to know everything that was going on. Now I don't anymore. So I'm just out here. I just want to go join where I'm relevant again. Yeah. That's painful to hear that kind of thing. So this is a critical area to make this work.
Yeah, and especially, I didn't think about, we were talking about the direct communication with managers. I worked for a company and we had this great discount at a cell phone company, right? And I was so excited about this. I was telling everybody worked for me, and they're like, wow, you're really excited about this. I'm like, this matters to me day to day, right? So sometimes it's the little things. It's not that, healthcare is great. I was really happy to have healthcare, but I was running around telling people about some of these other benefits that were sort of meaningful to me at a much smaller scale. Yeah. I think when people you have communication on the little things, it can often make the big things even more.
Well, yeah, we were just talking about even flexible schedules. The traffic out here outside of Boston area. Oh, yeah. If you can come in a little later and leave a little later, or come in earlier and you miss some of that, that flexibility is huge. Yeah. It's life-changing for some people. That's actually rising to the top as one of the kind of pain points for our employees.
Yeah, well, if you can find a time when there's not traffic on 128, you know that.
You should put that in an article somewhere.
And if you live around the area, you'll understand. But so that brings us to your last tips around sort of how you translate. You do a lot of translating.
Yeah, we tend to be doing a lot of that. So again, we mentioned cost before, but it does tend to define the parameters of what you can do. And what we try to do is share more about, well, what is the cost of the benefits we have. So our employees, when they hear what we spend for medical or what a 401k match costs, that still helps us set the priorities. There is things we need to be doing proactively and to meet the market level. So as I mentioned earlier, $1 billion company can do more because of the resources and money they have, but we can frame and prioritize the things that we do, not being $1 billion company. So that's critical. So I think once you have that in place, then we talk about attracting people. Managers and employees understanding not just the benefits, but the philosophy behind them, as we mentioned earlier. It's really, really important. So being able to market and promote it is critical. So what you have, put your best foot forward, and have a great discussion and understanding of what your value proposition. So people know, all right, this company is doing everything it can, given its size, its phase of growth, to put out there the best benefits that they can. And their managers and their employees seem to really understand it. Great thing when a candidate leaves a company and says, wow, that team understands what's going on. They know why, they gave me a lot of reasons why I should work there. They understand the benefits program in details. Everybody I talk to knows what they're talking about there.
I think it raises an interesting point because I talk a lot about the fact that, you know, the definition of work is that you're getting paid to do something, right? Otherwise it's volunteer work. But the last thing we talk about is compensation, and part of that is your benefits. And so I think it's really interesting that often in the sort of sales process, which is what talent acquisition often is in hiring, is we talk about the development for growth and we're a great company, but people also care about the nitty gritty of, like, you know, am I going to have dental? Am I going to have, you know, a cell phone discount? You know, and so being able to present that well-rounded, well-informed sort of perspective, especially when top talent has their choice, would you rather go to somebody who really understood what the value proposition was, even if the benefits might seem on paper a little better somewhere else? It's the difference of sense of the culture.
It's definitely an opportunity to communicate and show you have the ability to communicate that it's important to you.
Right.
So people get a sense when they walk away the climate and the culture of a company by how they were communicated with while they were there, and the level of knowledge that people have. This question about, am I in the dark, am I out of the loop? When they hear people that are in the loop, understand what's going on, are well informed, that is those are selling points in joining a company. And that gets to the last bullet on here, which is retaining. Very similar to attracting. Usually there are similar factors in both of those. But when employees know what's going on, when the CEO gets up and says, look, here's what's going on in the company, whether it's a new benefit or a new product, and people know quickly and they're not hearing about it from some other source, makes a big difference. So again, around the benefits area, works the same way.
Yeah. And much as the benefit cycle goes round and round, so that re-engaging, sort of rehiring, almost, you know, onboarding.
It's a great way to put it.
So constantly, because people forget, you know, about what, you know, what the benefits are of working here.
There was a CEO I worked for, and he called this for current employees replenishment. Some people use that term for recruiting, but I like it for people that are here.
Yeah.
So you're thinking about how to reconnect and recommunicate, and again, make sure they're in the loop and not in the dark.
And there's something actually beneficial when you are sort of tapped to talk about why it's great to work at your company, and you sort of remind yourself of all the reasons you decided to join as well. So it's sort of a win-win in both directions, because if you're educating managers on how to educate people around, you know, why it's great to work here, you get that little boost to yourself. You're like, oh yeah, right, I remember why, why I made this decision. So great. Well, Al, it has been a pleasure talking with you. Hopefully we've given some insights to help the folks on the phone. Just want to go over a few of our key takeaways, starting with that initial understanding of who your population is. You know, evaluate, survey, and communicate when beginning the process. Help people understand what you're doing and why. I think your comments about transparency are so important. People are so used to having that inundation with information. People expect information now, and they get suspicious when they don't have that kind of transparency. Design for the employees you need. It's not about this one universal best way to do benefits, but it's who do you need? You know, what are the needs of the population you're really going after to support your business goals? Communicate with consistency and variety, all those different channels that people are on, making sure that you're communicating properly through those channels, and knowing what should and shouldn't go through some of those channels sometimes.
This is an easy one to assess, to see how you did it before and what you could do to improve it in the next year.
If it's better than a PDF on a website somewhere, you're moving in the right direction.
That's right. That's right.
Helping your managers become champions, so important, both for their own sort of engagement as well as what they're able to do for the rest of your organization. And you measure success by the impact to employees and the business. To your point, if you're an organization that cares about the people and wanting them to stay, you need to have an understanding of how it impacts the individuals and also the business at the same time, and keeping those in balance.
I had a CEO I worked for. He said, are you an HR person in business or a business person in HR?
Ooh.
I'm not sure what the answer to that question is.
I know.
But I think if you can answer this question to some degree and be able to balance that,
and
I think
explain,
doesn't matter which of those two you are, but you need to be able to think in that language and answer that question.
And to explain to both sides why it's important.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Well.
Exactly.
With that, I know we have a little bit of time. There may be some questions, so we will open it up and I'll go back to Heidi for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple of that have come across, and if you have something that you'd like to ask Al or Mollie, feel free to type your question into the chat box on the GoToWebinar on the right-hand side, and we'll bring that over to them. So one question has come in. When considering benefits fit, how much of the evaluation should be on the core benefits like health and dental versus what might be perks, like you mentioned before, the cell phone discount, parental leave, or flexibility? Al, how do you kind of weigh that in terms of the core benefits versus other types?
I think each year when we do on an annual basis, look at what our strategy is around benefits. And there's some core, I think the person used the right word, core. There's some things that you just can't do without. You're going to look at things like medical. There's a standard list we all know in HR: medical, dental, life, long-term, short-term. And so when a person walks in for an interview, those must be there. And then after you get through what are the new costs for the coming year, you start to look at, okay, all of these factors that Mollie and I have been talking about, you start to weigh those. We've talked a lot about at CARE, looking and reframing looking at how we look at well-being, for example. So in the past, that might be, again, going out and looking at lists of other companies doing, they have Massage Mondays and free food and things like that. But when we look at what actually is impacting the health and well-being of our employees, it might be a different list. It always used to fall at the end of the list of those core programs. You know, you look at a medical program, it's $4 million a year for a company our size. And then you look at, you know, a wellness program, it could be a fitness challenge or something, and you go, all right, that doesn't even rise to the same level. Actually, when you're doing your strategy, we want to put them on a same level. So don't base it on cost, base it on what you've heard from your employees about importance. And also start to think about things that maybe aren't a cost factor. So when the person used core, you tend to think of very expensive things. But you can look at company policies, the time off programs, the holidays, the leaves of absence that we give people for important parts of their lives. We were talking about something where if a company understands that you give people the time to be off with their first child, for example, that's a bond you have with that company forever. They'll never forget it. So what does that cost you? And is that a core benefit? Not everybody in the company will even use it. I would call that a core benefit and not something that I think we actually look at the dollars and cents of something like that and the return you get back, it's pretty amazing. So I would say when you put your strategy together, think a little differently about don't base it on cost, although certainly that's a factor you got to consider. But I would put it equally across instead of in a list top to bottom, medical down to wellness, I'd put wellness on the same line as medical and then say, okay, what can we do as a company our size with our resources? What are we able to do? Even take a first step. So again, you'll have to have the core things in place, but are there some small things you could start to send messages, again, whether it's policies, programs, other benefits that may not be high cost, but have a high return for you?
It reminds me of the saying, all politics is local, right? People want to know the big things they're taking care of, but they also want to know the little things that impact their day-to-day that can be so meaningful, and you have to really balance those.
Yeah, those are all really good points. Someone else from, let's see, looks like they're from California, is saying we're constantly recruiting and competing against larger employers for talent. How do you convey the strategy and scalability of your benefits through your employee value proposition?
Oh, again, Mollie, I mean, I could talk about how we do it, and we've been successful at recruiting from that. I think a combination of, we have a benefits, so we do have a benefits brochure. It's not that I don't think we should have them, but it gives our managers and employees a way to talk about what our, at least in the benefit side, what the value proposition is, and then our mission and vision as a company, where we are. Those all matter in this discussion. Well, we've been able to hire, I think, from the bigger companies because we offer the same core kind of benefits. And then again, understanding what's behind it. How is the company benefits program developed? What are the current plans? So to the degree people can share those kinds of, those pieces of information and compare it to the companies that people are coming from. Often people are leaving larger companies looking for more intimacy in the workplace that they have. They want to be more connected to the people they work with, and sometimes the bigger companies get away from that. So I think your value proposition covers a lot. We've spent a lot of time talking about benefits today, but certainly things like the mission, the vision. We've had people leave large companies and come to our company and say, I want to do something that makes a difference, that helps people with their lives. So being able to talk about that, as well as having those core benefits and programs in place.
And we talk often about everyone in your organization should be on the lookout for talent, right?
Yeah,
and so everyone
always.
in your organization should be able to not only understand what you're looking for in terms of the fit of the organization, is this the type of person that fits in our culture, but also be able to articulate to them why you think they might be a fit.
Yeah.
And so I think some of it has to do with how, again, senior leadership models to managers and down the organization, modeling how to articulate that, and making sure that becomes part of your regular speech about how you talk about the company, not just financial performance or not just growth opportunity, but really getting that well-rounded picture and making that part of the everyday language by which you talk about your business.
Well, we had an interesting story. It's a lower level kind of role, but about 3 years ago, we were trying to hire a lot of co-op employees, and we were telling our employees, go out and recruit them, call your friends. And a number of people came back and said, I don't know what to tell them about the job
Right.
or the pay or anything about sort of what's the upside of being a co-op here.
Right.
I realized we just sort of assumed everybody knew how to do this and knew what to say. They wanted to do a good job and they wanted to be able to market it properly.
Yeah.
So we put together descriptions. We talked about what the rates are, actually how we came up with the rates for that. We talked about the fact that co-ops at our company don't go get coffee.
Right.
The leaders go get coffee. The co-ops come in here to learn, and we're a part of that that learning engagement, that learning program that they're doing. So, you know, and we have a high degree of referrals here. So again, it's important for our employees to know that value proposition, be able to talk about it. But that was a simple example where we just said, you know, here's the jobs, go do it.
Right.
And people came back and said, we just don't know what to do. You're going to have to help us a little bit.
It's all coming back to haunt us.
Yeah,
Right? The illusion
exactly.
that the communication has occurred.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And even if you kind of know it in your gut, sometimes it's just hard to articulate. You know, not
Yeah.
everyone just has that ability to articulate it concisely and clearly. So, great.
Well, it looks like we have time for one more question. So Al, previously you mentioned that you started an employee advisory board at CARE. So someone here is wondering, what steps did you take to put that together and put that in place?
That's a great question, and it was sort of interesting because when I told the group that was here, I said, well, we sort of semi-randomly picked you. What we wanted to do was make sure we had a representation of the different departments in the company. So we kind of looked at it and said, all right, how many people will we have on it? And then we wanted to make sure we had people from different generations, different backgrounds, different departments. We wanted a good representation of the company. So we went around, we also wanted to make sure we had new employees as well as people who had long tenure with the company. So when I say semi-randomly, it was a sort of a funny way to say, we kind of handpicked the team. We wanted people who could come in and you know, speak to this. We didn't sort of hide what we were doing in terms of the approach. We didn't send out an email and say, who wants to be on this committee? We wanted to pick people so that we had a good representation. And again, I think the key thing there is just to kind of be open about how you did it. And then we've had several meetings with that team, and it's been, I'll tell you, very eye-opening for me. People care about the company, and they want to trust that what they're taking time to do this, and you're going to have this meeting. One of the questions I got asked is, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be a part of this. I just want to know that the things we're talking and sharing and spending time thinking about, that it's really going to yield some kind of tangible result. So we started with looking at the survey data and getting people's input on survey, but also their input on other things. We spent some time really, you know, whiteboarding some of the whole list of things we could do in the company. And now we're starting to prioritize what those things may be that we can do going forward. Again, given our size and the resources we have available, really hugely valuable to the HR function. Because we used to do this 4 or 5 years ago. HR would sit down and come up with a list in a bubble and then come out and say, here's your new benefits program. Exactly what we're saying not to do, we would do early on. And now we really feel good about the fact that, again, the rubber meets the road with how you use the information and the insights you're given. But we are sincere about wanting to do this and excited about getting the chance to do it. So there's a long-winded answer to your question, but we basically looked at the group and said, we want representation, we want a diversity, and so we did handpick to make sure we have that. And everybody showed up, which was amazing. We had 20 people and everybody participated. I think people felt this was very important.
And I think to your point that there action is going to be taken. You know,
action is going to be taken.
Caution people never ask for feedback if you're not willing to act upon it. So.
It's something we could do again if people said, hey, you know what? We participated, we took the time, they put programs in place that we recommended, they went in the direction we asked them to go. If we want to do this next year, you know, I might go to the group and say, would you help us find the next 20 people to do this? So we mix that. But I think we have to have a success here, and we're on the beginning phases of that right now.
And that has to make the employees feel good too, that they were
does.
hand selected to really give their feedback and be integrated into the process.
I think it mattered.
That's great. Awesome. Well, that's probably all the time we have for questions, but we did want to mention as a thank you for joining us today, we're going to be sending you our latest and greatest guide, which is a 5-step plan for making the perfect addition to your benefits package. So check your inbox after this webinar, and we'll also send you a link to the recording of this webinar too, in case you want to watch it again or send it to colleagues. And we want to thank Al and Mollie for joining us. and here's the information for both Aptitude Research Partners and Mollie, and also for us here at Care at Work. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And if a shameless plug, if you liked this webinar, we have lots of blog posts and articles and guides from Mollie and Al and other experts on our blog, which is workplace.care.com. So thank you again for your time. Thank you to Al and Mollie, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.